Shabbos Parshas Dvarim, Shabbos Chazon, Erev Tisha B'Av Tavshin Lamed Daled. And the two parts of the Farbrengen that we're going to learn, part one today and part one on Wednesday, is because they both discuss the topics of Geulah and the topics of Simcha. So, and it overlaps a bit. So we will be entering a little bit the topic of Simcha today, and Wednesday, when we continue with this, we're going to be still talking about the topic of Geulah, but we're also going to talk about Simcha. We're going to talk about Bitachon and continuation from what we learned last week about Bitachon. So it's going to be a very interesting overlap. I'm going to try to stop at a good place in middle where we're not like hanging in middle, or we have a complete concept. Okay, let's begin. It's known, the aphorism of the Tzaddik Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Ditchev, his primary thing was Avas Yisrael. He was known to be someone that loved Jews, and he always used to speak good about Yidden, find a way how to be an attorney before Hashem for the Yidden. Shabbos Chazon, that in the Shabbos of Chazon, in other words, Chazon is the first word of the Haftorah of this upcoming Shabbos, as we will talk about at length. Chazon Yeshayahu, the Rebbe is going to talk a lot about the word Chazon over here. Chazon Meloshen Machzeh, Chazon from the word vision. That literally, as we're going to explain, it's talking about Yeshayahu's vision about, in the simple sense of Haftorah, negative things, but of course the Rebbe is going to talk about it in the positive. So the Rebbe Yitzchak Bar Ditchev said, and this Shabbos, right before Tisha B'Av, we show the last Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, every single Jew is shown the third Beis HaMikdash. He says in the second paragraph, he explained this, from an analogy of a father. Ben Yakar, he has a precious son. He made him a beautiful garment to dress himself up in. Since the son was not careful with that garment, he tore it to pieces. A second time he made him a garment, and again he tore it. What did the father do? He made for the son a third suit of clothes, a third garment, but he did not give it to the son to dress in. Instead, he put it away. And on distant occasions, known occasions, he shows his child this garment, and he tells his child, if you will act appropriately, so this garment will be given to you to dress in. This is a metaphor for the Beis HaMikdash, that the first Beis HaMikdash was, we know what happened with that, we know what happened with the second Beis HaMikdash. From time to time, the third Beis HaMikdash, which is likened to the third suit of clothes, as shown to the Yidden, the third Beis HaMikdash, and the time when the Yidden are shown the third Beis HaMikdash is Shabbos Chazon. That is the Shabbos when we read the Haftorah of Chazon Yeshayahu, this Shabbos before Tisha B'Av. The Inyan Zeh, Shabbos Chazon Al Shem Riyas Beis HaMikdash Shlishi, and this idea that the Shabbos Chazon is because of the vision and seeing the third Beis HaMikdash, ain't a bestir al pirish hapashut. It's not contradictory to the simple meaning. Shenikra Shabbos Chazon. Why is it called Shabbos Chazon? Al Shem Hascholos Haftorah Chazon Yeshayahu, because that's the psukim of the beginning of Haftorah. The first words of this week's Haftorah is the vision of Yeshayahu. So the Rebbe says there's no contradiction. Here you're saying it's a vision of the third Beis HaMikdash. Here you're saying it's a vision of Yeshayahu Hanavi. How do they fit? Since both explanations are connected one with the other. Also, the idea of the literal meaning of the vision of Yeshayahu, the pasuk does not leave its simple meaning. Kashur imam machzor shel Beis Hamikdash Shlishi. It's connected with the vision of the third Beis Hamikdash. And whereas we're used to, perhaps in many Farbrengens, where the Rebbe will elaborate, what does it mean that we showed the person the third Beis Hamikdash? How do Yidden see the third Beis Hamikdash? Even in some sichos, the Rebbe explains, why is it analogous, the Beis Hamikdash, to a garment? Here, the main focus is going to be how even Chazon Yeshayahu, even the literal meaning of the pasuk, that it's the vision of Yeshayahu, has to do with the Beis Hamikdash. He's not going to focus so much on the word of the Levitch Barditchver that we show in the third Beis Hamikdash, rather how even the simple pshat Chazon Yeshayahu has to do with the third Beis Hamikdash. Ois Beis Ubagdam. First, we have to preface the meaning of the word Chazon. Chazon moiral inyan hanavua. The word Chazon indicates prophecy. Because the advantage, the quality of prophecy is in the idea of vision. That is why prophecy is the great thing about prophecy is the seeing of the matter. This means it's not an idea of an intellectual comprehension, rather a vision that is beyond comprehension. And the Rebbe goes on to speak about there are certain advantages of intellect over prophecy, but it's still, with all those advantages, the true idea of seeing something isn't the idea of prophecy. So we're going to skip over that parenthetical point to the next page, what comes up as page Yudalad, and the Rebbe says, top of the page, V'zeh gufa, because of this great advantage and quality of prophecy, that it's beyond even intellectual comprehension, that this is the reason prophecy only existed when the Beis Hamikdash was standing. For the sake that there should be able to be prophecy, there's a need to have a Beis Hamikdash. If you don't have a Beis Hamikdash, the spiritual state of the Yidden are not high enough that even unique individuals should be able to attain prophecy. And ubizman abayas gufa yitzorich b'kama tanoim. And those in the times of Beis Hamikdash, prophecy was not something that everybody shared in, but rather prophecy was something that was only needed to have a lot of conditions. The Rambam goes into multiple conditions, what a person had to do, what a person's spiritual level had to be at to be able to merit prophecy. And even then, as much as he did, this was still up to Hashem if Hashem decided to give him the prophecy. Shalachein, for this reason, Gam Oz, even then during the times of the Beis Hamikdash, Nitna Nevuah Rakli Chidis Geulah, prophecy was only given to unique and special individuals. How come? All of this is because prophecy has this very great quality that we were mentioning, hinted in the word Chazon, or expressed in the word Chazon. That's the idea of vision, that you actually see it. As opposed to wisdom, that doesn't have the limitations, it doesn't have conditions. And it's possible to be even when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So as great as wisdom is, and there's even an expression that Alter Rebbe brings on, Tanya Chacham Adif Minavi discusses it in those paragraphs that we skipped, that a sage is even greater in certain aspects to a certain degree than a prophet, but still in all, the ultimate idea is really being able to see godliness, and that was only possible in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, because vision of Hashem, seeing of Hashem, is much, much greater than just understanding and comprehension. So he says in the second paragraph, for this reason, prophecy is called Chazon, because the advantage and quality of prophecy is that it's literally seeing it. It's not just seeing something in one's mind's eye. The Chazon hu melashon re'iyah. And Chazon is the same wording like the word seeing. Skip the parentheses to Ois Gimel, line 7. So that is one point that we have already at the beginning of our Haftarah. It's about seeing godliness. But what type of vision? What type of seeing? What's the topic that's being seen? In addition to the idea of vision in general, what is being referred to over here? What type of vision? A vision of Yeshayahu. What's the significance that it's a vision of Yeshayahu, which is the first two words of the Haftarah? Chazon Yeshayahu, when it says the vision of Yeshayahu, it's not just referring to the nevuah, the prophecy in this Perek. In other words, that only over here, the first chapter of Yeshaya Navi, that's Chazon Yeshayahu. No, it's an entire book of entire sefer of nevuahs of Yeshayahu. Elal kol nevuahs shel Yeshayahu. It includes all the prophecies of Yeshayahu Navi. Koil Gama Nevuah, the Nachmu Ami, including also the Nevuah that we read the Shabbos after Tisha B'Av, which is Shabbos Nachmu. We read the Nevuah where Hashem says, comfort ye, my nation. Kasei de Kedusha, like the order in Kedusha is, Shascholas Ha'inyan Koilas Kulei, that the beginning of the matter includes its entirety. So therefore, when we begin with Chazon Yeshayahu, v'kach gam b'inyaneinu, so too in our situation, in our topic that we're talking about here, Sha'aschol Chazon Yeshayahu, the beginning where it says the vision of Yeshayahu, koilelas kol on nevuah shel Yeshayahu, it includes all the nevuahs, all the prophecies of the whole Sefer Yeshayahu, which are like tens of prakim. So it's all a vision of Yeshayahu. So the Rebbe is going to say, what's unique about Yeshayahu Hanavi? In line 11, concerning the uniqueness of the prophecy of Yeshayahu over all other prophecies, it's known the talk of my father-in-law, Baal HaMaiser Geulah, the one who was imprisoned and redeemed. Again, I mentioned this before. We're already almost a month past Yud Beis Tammuz, and the Rebbe is still always like, until the next Yom Tov or whatever, it's still Baal HaMaiser Geulah, and after Yud Shvat, it's always like going on for a long time, the one whose yahrzeit it was. Anyway, that's parenthetical. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says, about the difference between the two Nevi'im, Yirmiyahu Hanavi and Yeshayahu. If you flip around the two middle letters of Yirmiyahu, it spells out bitter, because Yirmiyahu's prophecies and what he was about and also his experiences were actually very bitter. The Yeshayahu, on the other hand, the Navi Yeshayahu is Milshon Yeshua, from the word salvation. The Kivans, he says in line 14, V'kivan Yeshayahu Milshon Yeshua, since Yeshayahu is from the same language like salvation, so now put the two phrases together. When you put the two phrases together of Chazon Yeshayahu, the beginning of the Haftarah and the beginning of the whole Sefer Yeshayahu, so it comes out, Pirushay Machza HaYeshua, it comes out, it's the vision of salvation. What's the salvation referring to? Shui Geulah. It's the idea of the redemption. So, getting back to what we said before, that every Yid is shown the third Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos Chazon, it's connected directly with what the vision of Yeshayahu means. It's a vision of Geulah. He says in line 15, in addition to the fact that many prophecies are on the topic of redemption, that is to be found in Sefer Yeshayahu, that many of the content of many of the prophecies in Sefer Yeshayahu are about redemption. Even in this Haftarah, which a lot of it superficially seems to be negative and not about Geulah, but there's even a part in the Haftarah that we read this week that also speaks about Geulah. The conclusion of the Haftarah says, Tzion b'mishpat tipad geimer, that Tzion will be redeemed with mishpat and its captives will return with tzedakah. So the Rebbe says, in addition to all of that, what about the other prophecies in Sefer Yeshayahu, which don't seem to be oriented to Yeshua and Geulah and redemption? So the Rebbe says, even those prophecies that seemingly speak about the opposite, but still, since all of the prophecies, all the nevuos and the entire Sefer are Chazon Yeshayahu, they're the vision of Yeshua, they're the vision of salvation, Melashon Yeshua, they're also connected with redemption. So even prophecies that seem to be completely the opposite of the topic of redemption, since they're part of Chazon Yeshayahu Sefer, they are all about the vision of redemption. How could that be? So the Rebbe explains in line 18, the explanation, this is, Lefi shetachlisam shel inyanim elu, he shall yodam yovay inyan shel nechama, because the goal and purpose of all the negative prophecies that's to be found in Sefer Yeshayahu is that through those negative occurrences should come about a consolation and a comforting, and not just any consolation, but a double consolation, like we say in the Haftarah following Tisha B'Av, Nachemu Nachemu Ami, indicating the double consolation that Yidden get because of the Yerida, because of the descent, because of the destruction. And not only is it a double consolation, but it comes from a doubly high level, until the level where I am the one that comforts you. So it shows on a doubled level. Later on, he's going to mention this is even higher than Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the double Anochi. The Yisedim is that because Anochi Havai Elokecha, Asar Sadibra is only one time Anochi. The Yisedim is that even more so. Not only are these negative prophecies leading and a cause that afterwards there should be a double consolation of Anochi Anochi U'Menachemchem. But like the Rebbe points out, and we've had this a few times already, Shegam inyonim elu gufaim bepnimis inyan shel Geulah. These matters themselves are really deep down, internally, they're really about redemption. Like it's understood from the words of the Tzemach Tzedek in his notes on Megillas Eicha, Shemefarish hapsukim shel Eicha mal Yusuf. The Tzemach Tzedek takes psukim in Eicha, where the whole entire Eicha, almost 99% of it is about terrible and awful events, and the Tzemach Tzedek turns it around and gives it a deep meaning of positive and holiness and goodness. So the Tzemach Tzedek does this with Megillas Eicha. If this can be said, that the inner meaning of Eicha is good things, like the Tzemach Tzedek wrote, which Yirmiyahu Hanavi wrote it, like the Chazal say, Yirmiyahu Kosav Sifrei v'Sefer Eicha. Yirmiyahu both wrote Sefer Yirmiyahu, and he also wrote the Sefer of Eicha. Shinyan Merirus, that Yirmiyahu Hanavi, like we said before, it's in the word mar, it's in the word bitterness, and even Eicha, which was written by Yirmiyahu, who's about bitterness, really deep down the Tzemach Tzedek revealed how it's all hidden goodness in it. How much more so concerning the prophecy of Yeshayahu from the expression of salvation. That means the idea of salvation that's emphasized in his name is something that's revealed. So for sure, even negative prophecies in the Nevuah of Yeshayahu Navi, in the Sefer Yeshayim, to a pnimius inyan shel Geulah, that internally it's not just for the sake of redemption and consolation and so on, but inside of the negative there is the positive, there's the Geulah. So the Rebbe explains in line 24, Ois Dalet further, Hine inyan Yeshua, this idea of salvation. Shayach ra kasher lifnei zeh hayemaimed matzav bilti rotzi shememene hi Yeshua. When is it possible to use the term salvation? Salvation means being saved from something. To be saved from something, there had to be a state and situation of something that had a negative aspect, and you need to be saved from it. Similar to what it says at the conclusion of that Haftorah. Tzion b'mishpat tipade. Tzion will be redeemed with mishpat. What's the redemption of Gomer? She'inyan hapedia, the whole topic of redemption, the whole idea of redemption, shayach ra sheyesh inyan bilti rotzi she'mena nifta. There's only possible when there's something untoward, something negative that he has to be redeemed from, like the expression pidyon shvuyim. You're redeeming captives. So you can't redeem someone that wasn't a captive. There had to be something negative to be a captive, and then there was a redemption from captives. So the Rebbe goes on, line 27, as I'm moving for this understood. Chazon Yeshayahu, Machzeh Yeshua, the vision of Yeshayahu, which is meaning the vision of salvation, Kosher in Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, is specifically connected with the third Beis HaMikdash, more so than the second and the first. It doesn't apply as much. Sha'oz, because then by the third Beis HaMikdash, Tia Yeshua Mematzav Shel Hepech Inyan HaGeulah, then it will be the salvation from a state that was the opposite of the idea of redemption. Beis HaMikdash Harishon, the first Beis HaMikdash, Lo Yoyelafon of Maimed Matzav Shel Golus. There was no situation of exile when they built the third Beis HaMikdash. Shad b'meshach arba meis v'shmoinim shana mi'etzias Mitzrayim ad binyan habayis, for the duration of 480 years from leaving Mitzrayim until the building of the first Beis HaMikdash. Shekoilim arba'im shana shayim ne'Yisrael b'midbar. That includes also the 40 years that the Jewish people were in the wilderness. Amad HaMishkan v'chulu. There was a Mishkan that was standing, and then it moved, and it went from one place to another place, like you learned in Hilchos Beis HaBchira, and then it was in Shiloh for 300 something years. Kach shaloi haya tzairech be'inyan shel Geulah matz shel Golus. When the first Beis HaMikdash was built, there was no need to be redeemed from a state of exile. There was no exile that they were being redeemed from. That's the first Beis HaMikdash, where the idea of redemption doesn't apply. Last paragraph on the page, Beis HaMikdash Hasheni. How about the second Beis HaMikdash? Over there was exile. But the problem was what happened going out of exile. Though before the building of the second Beis HaMikdash, there was exile beforehand, the 70 years that was Golus Bavel. Since the second Beis HaMikdash was lacking 5 things, there was no Aron, there was no Luchas, etc., etc. So the redemption and the salvation was not complete, was not true, was not perfect. So therefore, it's either or. First Beis HaMikdash, there was no Golus, and the second Beis HaMikdash, there was no real Geulah. It wasn't a complete Geulah. Only by the third Beis HaMikdash do you have both in its complete and total contrast. Top of the next page, concerning the third Beis HaMikdash, Yeshlam Beza and Yonim, there are both components, both aspects. A redemption from a state and situation of exile. And the Rebbe points out something very interesting. To such a degree, should be Mois HaMashiach Gufa Yeh Binyan Beis HaMikdash of Fnei Kibbutz Goliath. According to the Rambam, as he's going to point out now, the Moshiach is first going to build a Beis HaMikdash. Then there's going to be the ingathering of the exiles. So it means that even when the Beis Hamikdash is built, there's still a Geulah that we need to overcome. Like the Rambam writes, that Moshiach will have built the Beis Hamikdash in its appropriate location. And afterwards, the Kibbutz Nitchei Yisrael, then he will collect the scattered Yidden. This means that the Beis Hamikdash will be built in a time when the Yidden are still in a state where they are scattered, where they are all in far-flung places. So we have Geulah preceding the Geulah, and the Geulah will be the ultimate. V'gam Geulah v'Yeshua Shleima, it will be a perfect and complete redemption and salvation. Since it will be an everlasting building, the Beis Hamikdash, forever and ever. So now the Rebbe goes on to say another advantage, another unbelievable thing about the third Beis Hamikdash. It says in Eishei, line 5, we can add in the explanation of the advantage and quality of the third Beis Hamikdash, al derech mailos Baal Tshuva al tzaddikim, similar to the advantage of Baal Tshuva over tzaddikim. Tzaddikim loy hoya etzloi inyanim shel chet. A tzaddik, he did not have a matter of sins. Ubemela, therefore, since he never sinned, ein ef shel adas ma yeh la'achar zechulu. One never knows what will happen tomorrow. Today, up till now, he hasn't sinned. Or up till yesterday he hasn't sinned. Maybe something will happen today that he won't know how to handle. He won't be spiritually equipped to take it on. For this reason it says, that one who goes out to war, choger means he puts on his armaments. Choger is from the word belt. He puts on his sword belt. He shouldn't be as boastful as the one that opens his belt, meaning he's returning from war. Someone that's only going out to war should not be boastful as of someone that returned from war and did not suffer because of the war. The same thing. The tzaddik is like someone that didn't go out to war. He didn't have any challenges to overcome. Mash'enkin Baal Tshuva, as opposed to Baal Tshuva, ein lachshish mash'yach harkach. You don't have to be concerned, he became a Baal Tshuva, what's going to be tomorrow? Because he's already withstood the test. He knows already the pitfalls, and he's risen out of it, and he's overcome it. Since he already passed through the situation, a state that was untoward, and he overcame it. Until the ultimate level of tshuva, in such a way that the intentional sins became for him like merits. So he got to the ultimate state. So like that difference between the Baal Tshuva and the Tzaddik, in a similar vein concerning the advantage and quality of the third Beis Hamikdash. Since prior to the third Beis Hamikdash, there were all the different changes of exile, and all the different difficulties, all the challenges, physical and spiritual. It wasn't just minor and lesser changes, but rather changes to the ultimate extreme. Yidden were in states, a situation that was the opposite of comfort, consolation, and redemption. The Afal became, despite being in such difficult situations. Through their service, they affected that the exile itself should become transformed to a matter of redemption. So it's a proof that it's something that's true, and that's why it's everlasting. Here the Rebbe gives a very geschmack explanation about why the third Beis Hamikdash will be everlasting. The previous Beit Hamikdashes did not have to do with tshuva, so there's to such a degree, therefore, it's untested waters, and there comes a wave that's too strong, and it floods and it destroys things. But once we've been tested in Geulah again and again in the worst way possible, now we are guaranteed. Now we know that we're able to overcome everything, and there's nothing going to stand in our way, and nothing, chas v'sholom, that's going to threaten us anymore spiritually to be able to undo the Beis Hamikdash. So the Rebbe goes on and connects us to the topic of Simcha, like I mentioned at the beginning of this Shiur, that he's also going to overlap our Wednesday Shiur. Line 12, V'zeu zoi gam ha'asbara al klos ha'inyan she'hafchu yom elu l'sosn l'simcha. This is also the explanation on the general topic that these days of the fasting and mourning will be transformed to rejoicing and happiness. Like it says in the pasuk, "V'afachti evlam l'sosn." Hashem says, I will transform their mourning to rejoicing. Like we find specifically concerning Tisha B'Av, even though it says it for all the fasts having to do with the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, but specifically we find concerning Tisha B'Av that's brought down, Shala'asid Lava Yi Yom Tov Gadol, when Moshiach comes, Tisha B'Av will be a great Yom Tov. So he says in line 14, like all matters, this idea of the transformation and the transformative aspect is also hinted in the revealed part of the Torah, that it says in Gemara, Isa b'Mishnah, in the Mishnah it says, Lo yehoyu yom tovim liYisrael ki chamisha asar ba'av u'yom kippurim. There were no other Yom Tovim celebration days for the Yidden as the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. So the classic question that's always asked, in a movement seemingly it's not understood, how is it possible? How does it make sense that the 15th of Av should be greater even than Torah mandated Yom Tovim? You have the 3 pilgrimage festivals. One of them is Sukkot, that's called Zman Simchaseinu, that it says, you shall rejoice in your Yom Tovim, and the 15th of Av is greater than that? How? The explanation behind it is, what is it about the 15th of Av that has that capability to be even greater than Yom Tovim that are written in the Torah and are obligated in the Torah and Simcha? That's because the advantage of transforming and turning it around. That's the common denominator between the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur. Yom Kippurim affects the idea of atonement and forgiveness for sins. Until the ultimate level of, and the ultimate perfect state of forgiveness, that it says, that Hashem says, Salachti kidvarecha, that I have forgiven like you asked. Which this is the Shu'inyan Hafichas Hasdoinus Lazachis. The ultimate level of forgiveness is not just that the sins are removed, but the sins are transformed to mitzvahs. So that is what Yom Kippur is about. Complete transformation, completely going from the worst extreme of Avedas to the greatest extreme where there's those very Avedas are now mitzvahs. And that is what the common denominator with Tu B'Av. That is also the idea of the 15th of Av. On the 15th of Av, the moon is full. In the ultimate ascent, after the great descent of the 9th of Av. Because, as we know, at the 15th of Av, on the 9th of the Yidden that were sentenced in the Midbar to pass away used to lie down the graves. Whoever was supposed to pass away that night passed away. And then the last year, when no one was supposed to pass away anymore, they didn't know for sure until the 15th of Av. And the significance of the 15th of Av is because the moon is full, and the idea of the fullness of the moon shows on the Yidden who are likened to the moon, and their calendar follows the moon, are in their full estate. So after the descent of Tisha B'Av, you have the fullness of the moon, you have the elevation and ascent of the 15th of Av. So that's the extremes. Taking it from the most negative time of Tisha B'Av and transforming it to the 15th of Av. That's why it's the greatest rejoicing. So the Rebbe asks a very logical question. Why seemingly do you have to go from one extreme to another extreme? Let it just be joy itself. He says in line 20, the L'chura in a movement, seemingly it's not understood. What's the need to have an idea that's the opposite of joy? That should be transformed to rejoicing and to happiness. So you start off with something that's negative, and then you transform it. What would have been lacking if you just had joyousness, just happiness, just rejoicing? Why do you need to go? First, let's go into the negative and then turn it over to rejoicing. So the Rebbe explains in line 22, Achar Bir, Bezabbat explanation this is. The true idea of rejoicing and happiness is only when it comes after an idea of the opposite of rejoicing. If I remember correctly, the Rebbe already in one of the other sikhs that we learned in the last few weeks mentioned the famous analogy of the Alter Rebbe and Tanya, the metaphor of a prince that was imprisoned and then he returns to his father, the king. It's a very great joy. It's understood, the Rebbe explained, that the joy is much greater when the prince is released from prison than a prince that was never in prison and they just have joy from the presence of the prince next to his father. The same thing over here. The true idea of rejoicing and happiness comes only by the transformative nature. So he says in line 23, concerning the days that were initially days of rejoicing and there was no change in it, similar to what we said about the level of a tzaddik, the level of the first Bate Mikdashes, where you don't know what would be, how strong they would be if there would be a challenge to come ahead. What happens if things change? Who knows? One doesn't know, it's impossible to know what will be afterwards if there's some type of change in the world, what's going to happen with the tzaddik, what's going to happen with the yidden, etc. Only, and specifically in days, that there was a situation of a change, the situation of being the opposite of joy and happiness. And despite that opposite thing, it was transformed to rejoicing and happiness. Then we know there's nothing what to be concerned about changes. Because the rejoicing is in such a manner that they already transformed the opposite of rejoicing to rejoicing and happiness. So therefore we know that even if there's negative, you can overcome it. Just like the Baal Tshuva, that even if there's negative, he overcame. So now you don't have to be worried anymore. He knows how to handle the negative. Only then, when there is the transformation from the negative to the positive, there is the advantage that we say in some of the further haftoidas in the upcoming weeks, where it says, I am the one that consoles you. Why does it say twice anoichi? Beis pamim anoichi, twice the word anoichi. This is even greater than I am Hashem your God. That was said by the giving of the Torah. That only one time Anoichi was said, I was said, because by Matan Torah it's similar to that state of tzaddikim. And it's not the full force and the full power of joy and commitment that we know about until there is a dip, there's a negative, there's the opposite of joy, and we have overcome it and we've worked our way out of that. Second paragraph from the bottom, line 29. According to this, will be understood the content of the topic of Shabbos Chazon. Sharias Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, the vision of the third Beis Hamikdash. Like the saying of the Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Ditchever, the Chazon Shayo is connected with the Haftorah of Chazon Shayo, like the simple meaning. How do we put it together? Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Ditchever says we're seeing the third Beis Hamikdash, and the simple meaning is that Yeshayahu Hanavi is seeing some things which actually, if you read the Haftorah, it's not the greatest. So he says in the last paragraph, Chazon Yeshayahu Kipshutai, the vision of Yeshayahu in the simple sense, Hu Re'iyas, it's the seeing, Chazon Shazoin Miles Hanavua. We said it's vision. That's the quality of prophecy. And what type of prophecy is it? What's the content of it? It's Chazon Yeshayahu, HaYeshua. It's a prophecy of salvation. That's why it's called Chazon Yeshayahu. It's the vision of Yeshayahu. The ultimate level of salvation is in the third Beis Hamikdash, specifically what we said before. The Nimtza comes out. The inner meaning of Chazon Yeshayahu is the vision of the third Beis Hamikdash, because it's the vision of Yeshua. The ultimate Yeshua, the ultimate salvation is the third Beis Hamikdash. So it's identical to what Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Ditchever said. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Ditchever said we show every single Yid the third Beis Hamikdash. And that's the meaning of Chazon Yeshayahu, the vision, the prophecy, the seeing of the Yeshua of the third Beis Hamikdash. Top of the next page. The Ein ze bestir lakach, sho pashtus medur baftoir ali nagolas. This seemingly contradicts. If you read the words of the Haftorah, it's really, really sad and terrible things. I remember seeing once a Jew, a Lubavitcher Chassid from some previous generation, that he was crying when he read the Haftorah, because it's really, if you read the words, it's talking about terrible things going on in Geulah. So how did you just tell me Chazon Yeshayahu, it's the vision of the salvation of the third Beis Hamikdash? Read the words, translate the words. So the Rebbe explains, because the idea of the salvation that through the third Beis Hamikdash, that will be an everlasting home. How do we reach a state where the building of the Beis Hamikdash will be such that it will never be destroyed? That will be an everlasting home. That's because it's built on the negative things that happen in this week's Haftorah, that speak about in this week's Haftorah. The Chivim Beis Hamikdash Shlishi Balachri in Geulah, since the third Beis Hamikdash comes following the idea of exile, this affects the transformation of exile itself to a matter of redemption. That's why it will be an everlasting redemption, that there's no Geulah following it. So therefore it fits in, everything fits in perfectly. Third Beis Hamikdash, like it's shown everybody, like Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Ditchever said. It's the vision, it's the nevuah of the Geulah as the meaning Chazon Yeshayahu. And that is built, the fact that it's the ultimate Yeshua is built on the what's foretold in the negative in the Haftorah. So he says in the second paragraph, line 5, that's also the connection between Shabbos, which is known as Shabbos Chazon, to be the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av. The idea of Shabbos is that from that day, all the days of the week receive their brachas. Therefore, from the day of Shabbos, that from that Shabbos Tisha B'Av receives its blessing. Marim l'chol echad miYisrael. Every single Jew is shown Shepnimius inyan agolas Tisha B'Av Nagula. One should know that what's the inner idea of Golas? What's the inner idea of Tisha B'Av? It's redemption. That is what it means, being shown, like the child is shown the suit of clothes. That's what it means, seeing the third Beis Hamikdash. Why? Because the third Beis Hamikdash is the ultimate perfect state of redemption, not like the redemption of the first or second Beis Hamikdash. Yet, that doesn't mean we just sit back and watch. The Rebbe concludes with the last paragraph over here, 9. But to reveal this, there's a need for the idea of tshuva. Through tshuva, we transform the untoward things, the negative things. And through this, we affect and cause. These days will be transformed to rejoicing and happiness. Like the Rambam says, that the Torah promised that eventually Yidden will do tshuva. And when they do so, immediately they will be redeemed.